Hi there. My name is Ryan Broderick. I'm a freelance tech writer. I write a newsletter called Garbage Day, and I'll be hosting this panel today. I hope we can have some great conversations. The theme is the cyber threat landscape, and I have some fantastic guests. I have Luigi Rebuffi, the Secretary General and founder of the European Cybersecurity Organization, Tom Kellermann, head of cybersecurity strategy for VMware, Dianna Kelley, the CTO and co-founder for SecurityCurve, and Ivana let me do that again. Bartoletti, Global Chief Privacy Officer for WIPRO. I want to kick things off with a question for everybody, so feel free to jump in if this is passionate for you. But basically, the last 2 years have brought a lot of challenges on the economic and social level across the world. We have the pandemic, the war in Ukraine, all kinds of fracturing geopolitical issues. So I wanted to start there and talk about how that has impacted the cybersecurity industry. So this is open for any of you. What are some pressing concerns in that world?
I think the reality of more and more nation states are seeing cybercrime cartels as national assets. And you're seeing greater organization, greater sophistication, and more destructive attacks being leveraged. And most importantly, you're seeing a phenomenon called island hopping, which is spreading like wildfire, which is they try to hijack the digital transformation of the corporation, of the government agency, and then use it to attack their constituency. But that nexus, that pax mafiosa between various intelligence services and rogue nation states and cybercrime cartels is quite troubling, and it's been metastasized in cyberspace.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Tom just said, is that you're looking at nation states and nothing succeeds like success. And this is now something that countries understand that we can attack each other over. It's actually become another dimension of war for NATO. Cyberspace has. Another piece that goes on here, though, is that as you see economic impact, as people are getting displaced either from their countries or from their jobs, some people can find another job, which is great. Some people can't. So there are actually more people now that are looking for ways to make money. And in some countries, a way to make money is cybercrime. So you're seeing an advance in cybercriminality because of that, because of some need for financial gain that these people have because they're undergoing issues politically or financially in their own countries. So, and even in countries where you may not see the impacts quite as greatly as in others, there's a lot of inflation globally. There's economic instability and there is inflation occurring globally. So that also, again, if people can't find legitimate ways to earn money, unfortunately, some of them do turn to crime, and cybercrime is a part of that.
So I always think it's really useful when we're talking about this sort of thing to zero in on specifics. I think for anyone who isn't super tapped into this world, they hear cybercrime and they think like the stock image of the guy with the mask on at the computer. So what are some of the top kinds of cybercrime that have been proliferating in the last, let's say, 2 to 5 years?
Well, okay, since I started it.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Phishing. Phishing, without a doubt, and phishing. So phishing is when you send an email to somebody, and back in the day, it would be, "I'm a Nigerian prince or princess, and if you send me $20,000, I'll give you $1 million." Right? Everybody knows that's not real, but they do really targeted phishing now. That you can be called spear phishing or laser phishing, where they really focus in on you and who you are and where you work and who you know and what you're expecting in for bills. And then they send you an email that is crafted to say that, "Hi, I'm the IRS and you owe money," or "I'm your electric company and you owe money, click here," or "I'm your boss." And if they've done enough background on you, then they know that. So phishing. So people should be definitely aware for phishing, and any emails that look suspicious can come in through phone, come in through text. Actually, text phishing. Some people call it smishing because SMS used to be what we call text.
Right.
Those are really on the rise. So looking for those is important. And something they're looking for in these, in addition to getting your money, they're also very interested in your credentials. So if you think, well, they didn't ask for my bank account, they just wanted like my email address or my password, that they're looking for that too. Because as Tom was pointing out, island hopping, as we move to the cloud, and islands of our data and information and assets in the cloud. What ties us together for access is our identity, our username and our password. So for most people listening, look for phishing within your organization, look for phishing in your personal lives. That's going to be one of the big target vectors.
Two phenomena that are rarely discussed here that I think are important to highlight are, major ransomware cybercrime cartels create affiliate programs for two reasons. One is they can make money off of leasing the capability to a traditional criminal who doesn't have the technical sophistication. But the other part is every piece of ransomware deposits a secret passageway or a rat on a system, which allows the primary cybercrime cartel or the intelligence services whom allow them untouchable status to have immediate access to that back end of the system that was hit by the affiliate. So it's almost like they're colonizing cyberspace with the capability. And to that point, my last point here is this. I'm quite troubled by the fact that there are access brokers out there now, which basically means I want specific access to this corporate system or this government agency system, and I can purchase it with virtual currency.
Yeah, it's a real business. Okay, organized crime. It's really an organized crime. We're bubbling up. It's now it's becoming much wider than the, let's say, the drug market. In the past, we were saying more or less in the past, let's say 5-6 years ago, let's say more or less cybercrime was equivalent to the drug market, but now I think it's twice as big as that. So it's really becoming a real, in a way, business. And something that we see also these days, because we're talking about the COVID, we are somehow in the post-COVID area time, and somehow we have to find a new to stabilize the society and really to see how we are tackling this new situation, which is different from what we have lived in the last 2 years, as you mentioned. It's a new situation where we are coming back at work, we are meeting again, we are traveling again, and so on. And it's a new world, and not the same as before. It's not the same as the last 2 years. It's a new world, and we have to see how to face that, how we face cyber threat. But at the same time, we have also, you mentioned before, the Ukraine war, and we are in Europe. I'm today in Brussels. This morning I was in Paris, and I'm following also what is happening in Europe. We have daily attacks, and for instance, in Italy, again, let me mention another country. We have daily attack of killnet. It's not big attacks because they are DDoS, but we are daily attack disturbing the ministries, the critical infrastructure, and so on. And these attacks are, let's say, it's a kind of new entry in the ransomware, in the fraud or whatever. New entry in the sense that really every day you see repeating these attacks and testing the weaknesses, the vulnerability of the systems in a country, then also in other European countries. And this is a new modus operandi somehow. And behind that, maybe it's not real business, but maybe, let's say, there are some ideology, I don't want to mention to give names, they have some ideology somewhere, they find also some money for sponsoring this. So yeah, it's quite a complex situation.
I would agree. I mean, I don't know how you all feel, but I think it's been, the last few years have been quite transformative for and as you always have been saying, I think we've gone from, everybody's working from home and everybody trying to invest incredibly in protecting organizations from one day to another, having to deal with, workforce completely displaced and working from home. I don't think, we are going back to the same level of where we were before ever, because I think the workforce has changed, employees have changed. They don't want to return to that. And I think companies are, slowly adapting to the circumstances in a context, as Luigi was saying, where we now have, the completely new dimension brought in by the Russian attack on Ukraine, and this is causing a completely new level of a completely different landscape in terms of attacks that we're witnessing, and of course we will need to adapt to this. And I think what has been also really, really interesting over the last few years has been that that we have also seen, for example, a lot of emphasis on sort of, for example, the use of artificial intelligence in trying to mitigate some of this, and a lot of sort of glamour around it, a lot of it. But we've also seen sort of artificial intelligence somehow used to mitigate some of this, or at least allegedly used to mitigate some of this. And on the other hand, we've seen also a lot of new technologies being brought in, but also these technologies themselves, like artificial intelligence, that companies are starting to use more and more, being risky and being opened to cybersecurity risks, which are new to organizations to manage. So I think it's the sort of the constantly and fast evolving landscape at the moment. Within all this, I think we have more sort of awareness that people have, and this is important, I think. So Diana was mentioning phishing. There is more awareness, I think, among people. But at the same time, things are getting more and more sophisticated, and I think, and in the landscape which is constantly evolving, with, I would say, a lot of geopolitical considerations that also need to be taken into account, as Luigi was mentioning.
That's
From
actually
a perspective. I think it's important to note that the primary attack vectors that we're seeing are attacks against APIs.
Yes, exactly.
Stored about the vulnerability of AI and some of the new fintech platforms. Attacks against application attacks are surging, and a lot of folks are not very clear on the importance of OWASP top 10 to defend against those, nor are they clear that the attacks that are viable against websites to turn them into watering holes can now be done against mobile applications, because they have similar vulnerabilities there. And then the last point I think that's important to stress here is that you're seeing a surge of counter-incident response, where the adversary is fighting back to maintain persistence on a system. They're no longer just evacuating the situation when you bring in law enforcement, or when you bring in a great IR partner to investigate the breach. They're escalating the situation. They're more willing to disrupt the integrity of data. They're more willing to manipulate the value of time, and they're more willing to deploy a wiper or a destructive attack in an environment to punish the defender.
So we talked a lot about kind of the different kinds of cybercrime that have evolved over the last couple of years, but has that led to a response from the cyber threat industry, you guys in particular? Do you have any sort of innovations that you're following really closely, that you're really interested in how we're responding to these new kinds of threats? Like what's the hot ticket in the cybersecurity world right now?
Well, you have to come to Jesus, as they say out here in Colorado, with the fact that the adversary is already inside the environment. You have to defend from within. You have to totally shift the way you defend, from trying to focus on 100% prevention, which really isn't possible given that you see the geopolitical tension play out in cyberspace and some of the very sophisticated attack capabilities are out there, but also compounded by the fact that it's been the year of the 0 day. More and more zero-day exploits have been released against Microsoft, VPN environments, attacks even against VMware. It's a constant game where the adversary has a footprint, but how do you actually suppress the adversary in your environment before it escalates to either an island hop or a destructive attack? And I think to achieve that, there are some solutions out there that are viable, but others that are not.
Yeah, another thing that's really, people are hanging a lot of hope on AI and ML. And there is a lot of hope there. I'm a huge proponent of it. We as human beings have created all these incredible systems that generate a whole ton of data. And to try and get through that data to understand where the anomalies, or where a very sophisticated, very quiet, low and slow kind of attack, because these attackers are trying not to tip their hand. They don't want you to know they're there. So trying to find them can be very difficult, especially when we've got so much data and we're operating in so many different clouds and networks. So AI and ML are actually wonderful. Computers are fantastic at looking for patterns or things that might not be so obvious. So that's where AI and ML can really help us. Also, by using a Monte Carlo simulations and Markov chains, you can start to understand where an attack might go. Even if no one's ever exploited that path, the AI and the ML can actually help you understand this is a viable attack path, so you need to protect it. So there's a lot of good that can be there, but I don't want to overplay it in that this is not a magical solution. We can't just sprinkle magical AI fairy dust over our systems and say we're all protected. So it's definitely, you asked for something that's new, that's different, that's emerging. Using ML to understand not just where the anomalies are, but also where the attacks could be in a form of prediction, very, very valuable, especially with all the data that we've got. So that's a big one. The other thing that's really, you've seen a huge shift for, is the embrace of detection. So I've been doing IT for well over 30 years now professionally. And, we used to hate detection because most of the time it just meant you shut all the systems down and nothing worked. But detection's getting a lot more sophisticated too. So not just having a system that says, and response, not just having a system that says there's a problem, but also the system actually being able to take that detection to response and shut things down in a very surgical way without shutting down the entire organization. So you'll hear DR, EDR, MDR, XDR, all of those end with the DR is always detection and response. And the letter at the beginning is whether it's on the endpoint or whether it's in the network.
I'd just like to add something. Diana is really great at explaining things, and is really good. And I don't have much to add to what you just said, Diana. It's really good. I wanted to just raise one point, which I think has become quite relevant. I don't know, what others think, but there is a trend. I mean, I have a background in information governance and sort of privacy law and all, so I focus more on that side. One of the key trends which I found in recent time, especially sort of in sort of the privacy world, is very much a little bit of a shift from sort of traditional security policies and that we would have had and approaches that we would have had in the past, to I would say quite a dramatic shift to the role of privacy enhancing technologies. And this is a shift that I'm seeing quite strongly in looking, for example, at the role that, of course, we are increasingly sharing data, although at the same time we're witnessing a very much of a data nationalism and data localization drive across a lot of countries. But we are sharing more data, in especially to train algorithms, and nevertheless, of course, this is sort of an increase the sort of the risks that we're facing. But what I'm seeing a lot is a more of a drive towards sort of investing in data masking, k-anonymization, differential privacy. So all the sort of the data, sort of privacy enhancing sort of stack and the technology stack that can move away a little bit from the purely focus on sort of the security element towards, let's invest in safeguarding the data and with all the difficulties, because we know how difficult it is to de-identify data or to identify data, but to anonymize data. But really, this is a trend that I've seen, and I don't know. I mean, I'm curious with Diana, following what you were saying, if you've seen this too.
Yeah, I actually wanted to, thank you very much. This is actually next on my list, actually. So I wanted to talk about sort of the ethics and around the privacy and the data collection that's happening and the data sharing that's happening across countries, across, different continents now. How is that impacting, privacy, human rights? How is that complicating cyber threat responses? How is that allowing cybercrime to evolve? Like, how is data and privacy impacting these sort of things?
I mean, there is I don't know what other things, but it's really interesting because what is happening at the moment is that, data localization is the big thing in 2022. Whether it's India, whether it's Europe, which runs too, whether it's is partly China, but we are seeing a big drive to localize data as much as possible. And this confusion to an extent between data protection and data protectionism is going alongside some sort of alignment across data privacy laws across the world, because we live in a world where 140 countries have enacted privacy legislation. And then this goes in contradiction with sort of the drive to localization, which, as Luigi, going back to what Luigi was saying, there's a lot of sort of geopolitical drive underpinning this as well. I mean, whoever is like us is in the data world knows that a lot of the things that we're seeing now happening between Russia and Ukraine, and the alignment that we're seeing from a geopolitical standpoint, at global level, we have seen this with data before, you know, and this is really why this industry is so fascinating. But I think certainly the drive to data localization is partially motivated by security issues, where in my view, there are more issues related to sort of geopolitical issues, as well as a genuine drive to grow and harness the value of the data without being exploited by other countries, you know, which is fair enough, you know, especially in countries that are data rich, like India, you know, 700 million smartphone users, and a country that really wants to grow their the data that they produce in house. So but I think, you know, one of the reasons that at least apparently is used is motivated, you know, motivates the data localization drive is exactly security and protecting from sort of cyber crime. So this where I think there's a lot of it's a very difficult area, this one.
I think it's a very interesting point you're raising though, because for years people would assume that because the data is encrypted, it's secure, it's private. It's not really the case anymore, because adversaries can compromise the laptop or the server that has the key to unlock it. And that's what they do the majority of the time, which is why, to Diana's point, detection and response is so fundamental. But when you think about localization of data and an era of cloud computing, what's most important is, can you protect the workloads as they migrate between different cloud environments, as you attempt to localize that workload, that cloud experience, that container per se, must be secure. And that goes way beyond encryption solutions of yesteryear to provide for that, both privacy and security. And so I very much ascribe to the European model that you can't really have privacy in the absence of cybersecurity versus the American model, which is very different. But I don't think that encryption is the sole answer, the end all be all to achieve that.
I would like to add the fact that well, privacy is very important, especially now here in Brussels. Politicians are very attentive to all these issues linked to the ID, the citizens, and so on. And so, but the point is that when I was this morning in Paris at the conference, there was the head of the French agency who was reporting that in the last years, the most important, let's say, crisis they had to face were not only, well, especially on data, 80% of the case were linked to IPR, not necessarily on privacy. So really stolen data for, let's say, whatever intelligence, business, and so on. So of course, the ID and the GDPR and so on are very important for the citizens, politically relevant, socially relevant, but the threat to the society, to the country, and so on are on the other side. So we have to consider the two aspects. That's what I want to say. It's not only the importance of the data of the citizens, health data, whatever, and you know it, but also the data for the economy, sure, and for the security of the country. So.
Yeah, and there's one thing that we haven't touched, and because these are all exactly what organizations need to be thinking about and countries need to be thinking about in terms of what another country might do with their data. Maybe not, I mean, it could even be some kind of simple, we often go to espionage and nation state, but it could be as simple as, look, I'm in the United States and I have many, many times talked to people up in Canada who say, I don't want my data in your country because the United States has a different approach to data than Canada does. So that really matters. Another thing that people might not be thinking about that I think is really important with privacy is the humanitarian aspect. So I'm on the board of a nonprofit called Cyber Future Foundation. And one of the things that we've been doing in the past few years is helping refugees in countries. In Afghanistan, helped Afghanistan refugees, we're helping Ukrainian refugees. Now, you might think, well, what does like cyber have to do with refugees? But there's a whole lot of communication that goes on now when we do anything at all that we do is a digital communication. It's an email or it's an SMS or, a text message. And if you're trying to get people out of a country where they're being attacked, their ability to communicate privately and have that privacy is really, really important. Even some of these organizations that have popped up to help refugees, which you'll see is like people just join the organization. How are they being vetted? Because there's this very important need to respond as quickly as possible to people who need food, who need water, who need access to things to keep them safe and healthy. But on the other hand, this communication channel, if it's not secure, if it's not private, that's going to be an issue. And it's the people who go into the channels that are trying to provide aid, but are actually, fraudulent. They're catfishing, and they're from someone who's trying to hurt those that are getting aid. This can be a huge problem. So privacy is coming up for everyone, for citizens, when we see things with refugees and governments, and also obviously governments and just general data sovereignty we've been discussing. So it's a huge, huge consideration.
We're probably a little over halfway through our conversation, and I want to sort of switch to thinking about the future. And we've sort of mentioned it a few times, but I think it's time to address the crypto elephant in the room. So I'd love to sort of start to talk about the cybersecurity threats that are happening, both with the use of cryptocurrency as payments, but also in the burgeoning field of Web3. So for folks who are watching who might not know what I'm describing, it's a movement to kind of rebuild the internet based on various blockchain technologies. And so what I'd love to start with is just how has the mainstreamification, if you will, of cryptocurrency in the last couple of years impacted cybersecurity?
Well, the first adopters of crypto were organized crime who operate in cyberspace, period. Okay, let's just be very clear. The majority of money laundering in cyberspace associated with cybercrime or child porn or ransomware attacks is actually not being laundered necessarily through Bitcoin. There are other alternative payment systems and virtual currencies out there that turn a blind eye to nefarious activity. They should step up in how they enforce on their platforms. Monero is an example of one. And you have the complexity and the privacy associated with some of the more modular virtual currency systems out there that allow for this fog. And the fog, one thing I want to point out here that's of fundamental importance is the rogue nation states of the world, who the Western world have sanctioned, are offsetting those economic sanctions with cybercrime. And they're laundering the proceeds of cybercrime back into their economies. One great example of this is 6 years ago, the Duma changed the law saying that if you have virtual currency that you can't attest to where you got it and you want to move it back into the Russian financial sector, you can do so but pay a 13% tax.
Right. And this cybercrime fog that's surrounding cryptocurrency, how is that being impacted by the waves of like retail investors, people who have no idea what they're doing, who are using these platforms that are also sometimes fairly open to cyber attacks or people having their money taken? You hear a news story every week about some crypto investor who has no idea what they're doing and got phished. Or, are these things that are popping up on your radar as well, where there's just a new genre of cybersecurity issue to deal with because of cryptocurrency becoming more popular?
So there's definitely the issue of, anybody, if you're investing in crypto, you need to protect how you access that asset the same way that you would any other asset. So there's, people are being phished in crypto, but they're being phished for their regular bank too. There are two major differences. One is around just in general, like who's running this stuff, because the person who's running your bank has been vetted and they've had background checks. The person who's running your crypto, there was one who was the CFO of a very large crypto community that was a felon. It's a convicted felon. So you may have people, you don't know who's necessarily running these systems. So you as an investor need to think about that. And then adjacent to that is there is no oversight at all, no protection, no governance from the government. I mean, our governments actually provide us a lot in a fiat currency, right? They're standing behind that fiat currency to give it some strength. There's nothing, even the stable coins, as we saw, they can go well below $1, right? They're not that stable. They're kind of shifting sands. So keep that in mind. That you don't know who's running these systems. They could be criminals. In fact, some of them are. And that there's no government oversight to ensure that if your money goes missing, that there's any, if you're in a U.S. FDIC insured bank, for example, you're protected up to, I think it's $250,000. What are you protected for in crypto? So when people think, and they're like, well, the stock market's super risky too. It is, but in a different way. There's still a company that you're investing in the stock market. In crypto, that Dogecoin could just be worth nothing tomorrow.
Right.
Let me say a few words about something that maybe Ivana will jump on the chair. When I'm talking, you two spoke about the Web3. I would like to say something similar, which is the Metaverse, which actually today it's a lot of discussion about privacy issues, threat to the person, whatever, virtual threat in a sense. Nevertheless, it's quite a controversial discussion today at this societal level. But actually, we could expect that this Metaverse will see a new economy coming up, and we see already a number of transactions in this virtual world, which are based on cryptocurrency, and probably there will be a new kind of crime coming up with this new economy, which still is it's at the very beginning, because the world itself, the structure itself of the Metaverse, it's under creation. So I think we could expect very interesting, let me say, evolution of a virtual economy in this virtual world with new cybercrime, which actually will impact very hardly on the real life at the end.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, there are many things that worry me about the Metaverse, Luigi.
I told you that's one reason why I was just teasing you a little bit.
There are many things. No, but but I'm not. I attend, wait for with great curiosity. No, but seriously, it is true. I mean, it is true that a lot of the crimes that we've seen in society will see in the Metaverse anyway. It's the problem would be how we tackle them. And for sure, from an economy perspective, we need to be prepared to see a sort of completely different sort of exposure to completely different sort of level of attacks, which we will have to deal with. I just wanted to also say something about what is going on in terms of sort of crypto and Web3, and I mean, this is a concern that I really have, which is I'm seeing a lot of countries coming up with sort of strategies in relation to how to sort of embed the use of digital currencies and virtual currencies and cryptocurrencies, and what I see missing is a bigger level of governance around all this. And I find that is really disconcerting, because I mean, every other day I read something about a new strategy or a new, but what I find missing is sort of the understanding that that all this needs sound governance, and the impact on unfettered use, for example, of this sort of new possibilities for ordinary citizens can be devastating. And this is really disconcerting.
Yeah, I won't name the venture capital firm
Exactly.
that talked about this recently, but they compared crypto and Web3 to the early days of the web, and they said this in an exciting way. But it's like, but also the early days of the web were like you couldn't put your credit card into different websites. That was the one rule I had growing up, which was like, don't give websites your financial information because they'll steal your identity or whatever. And it feels like there's a lot of money right now riding on the idea of creating that environment again, but more immersive than we've ever had. And so you brought up governance, and I'd love to hear, like, Are there conversations in the cybersecurity world about what governance for this sort of stuff would look like or how it would function?
Ryan, wait, there's one point we got to raise here. The Web 3.0 and this renaissance of virtual currencies is creating another aperture, which is a vector of attack. And what I mean by that is I write a report called Modern Bank Heists every year. This past year, 130 financial institutions said that 94% of them experienced attacks against their APIs. And what they attributed that to was that they're trying to basically reach out to the modern new retail customer or for generation space. And they want to get involved with providing virtual currencies if traditional bank wants to get in the game. And so they work with these small fintech vendors that build out these API platforms for them to allow them to connect to that world. And they do so in an insecure way. And then that same API platform is now being used to target the bank and then be used to target their constituency. And so when you think about the metaverse, think about it as a vector of attack, because beyond money laundering and obviously the traditional crimes that can be facilitated therein through NFTs writ large, imagine when the NFT is used to attack you, or imagine when the connective tissue that you have to that new world is being used to attack your network, your system, or your life.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And so I guess, yeah, just to spin back, because we only have a few more minutes left. So I'd love to sort of look towards the future. So the first question I have is just, what do we do? You hear you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It seems like we are moving towards this metaversal cliff that we're all going to fall off of in a couple of years. So what do these responses look like? How do we make this safer, better, work better for us?
And Ivana really touched on it earlier about building privacy, and it's about being thoughtful as we're adopting these new technologies. I was working at a Big Four consulting firm right at in the end of the late 90s, and everybody was all like, "Oh, Y2K, we had so many projects that we were working on Y2K and trying to prevent a disaster." And when Y2K came, a lot of people were like laughing at me. They're like, "Oh, I guess you guys were just ripping people off all that time. Y2K was nothing." It's like, no, a big part of why Y2K was nothing was that there were so many organizations thinking about it and working on it and trying to prevent this problem in advance, because just seeing something coming up and doing your best to prevent it can help a lot. And traditionally in technology, we have this pattern that we get so excited about the new tech. Like now we're doing it with crypto. It's going to change the world. It's going to rewrite the internet. It's going to be Web3. And we forget that, hey, we also have to think about security and privacy and trust as we start to deploy out these solutions. So I think that's the main thing. Even looking at something like quantum crypto, even talking about crypto, and we didn't get into quantum, but there was this big fear about it, because traditional crypto is not going to be as resilient in the quantum space, that all crypto is going to be dead. But their NIST is doing a program where they're looking at candidates for quantum resilient crypto. We're thinking ahead. We're going to build security and we're going to build privacy and trust, right? And if we can do that with Web3, if we can do that with the metaverse, instead of just getting so excited about what it can do and remembering it's not going to help us if we can't trust it, and we build that trust with security and privacy. And I think that's what we really need to focus on.
I would agree. I mean, totally. I mean, yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we are kind of sleepwalking a lot of it. And this is a little bit worrying, but on the metaverse, I feel, yes, I mean, from a cybersecurity perspective, yes, I mean, there'll be a lot of risk of NFT fraud, because obviously NFT will be quite at the sort of heart of it. And then you'll have 3D glasses, what that will mean, in terms of, so there is so many, there's so many sort of new risks that we will have to deal with. But I would say two things. The first is that I think we need to be mindful and do things in a responsible way. I mean, we don't have to do something because it's technologically possible. I mean, there are a lot of I think risks, but not just risks, but also consequences on the planet, on society, that we need to be mindful before we embrace any sort of any new technology that or any new sort of development. And the other thing is I think on privacy, I think, yes, privacy and cybersecurity certainly go hand in hand, but they are very different and very separate things. And I think that one of the ways that, and I'm not talking about, I mean, Luigi's right, when we talk about attacks to states, and there's not just personal data. I mean, there's a lot of very, very valuable data that is not personal data, and it's really important to protect. And to me, this is crucial. But from a privacy standpoint, one of the key things to me is, well, let's start reducing the amount of personal data that we collect. I mean, is it really necessary with the advancement in technologies that we have? Is it really, really, really necessary? Can we reduce the risk by investing in privacy enhancing technologies? Can we reduce the risk by using synthetic data? Can we, I mean, are we still, can we invest in smart data, not just in quantity of data that we collect? I mean, do we still have to, in 2022, I mean, is the data extractivist model the only model that we need moving forward? I mean, these are questions that we all need to ask ourselves. And it's not about sort of, it doesn't mean that we don't want to invest in technology. It's the opposite. We do. We do want to invest in innovation, but, is there an alternative model to the data extractivist one? And this is like an important question that we need to ask ourselves. And new technologies can help. Smart data can help. Synthetic data can help. Differential privacy, new ways of encryption, secure multi-party computation. I mean, to me, the future is there and can really help. And then, obviously, I mean, I am very concerned about sort of I'm very, very concerned about the role of sort of cybercrime in sort of wider geopolitical affairs. That is an element that deeply concerns me because obviously is sort of lies in the hands of things that go sort of that are very big and sort of much more difficult to tackle.
And I would add something, because we maybe was not foreseen in the scheme of the discussion today, but still we are talking about a huge increasing amount of data. Is this data sustainable?
Exactly.
I mean, the management of the data from the, let's say, from the exchange of data, the environmental point of view and so on, is this really what we are looking for? How we manage to do the same handling, as Ivana was saying, of this, are we needed, do we really need in the future to manage the same way we're doing today, all this amount of data? I'm not so sure.
I agree.
It's not useful, simply not efficient, and not needed.
And environmentally totally unfriendly.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I would completely agree. And I would challenge the purveyors of Web 3.0 and the developers of that ecosystem to baseline for behavioral normality in that environment, such that they can actually assess behavioral abnormality in that environment, because I'm fearful that this will be the year of the NFT IED. And we don't need that. We don't need any more of that in this world. We don't need ransomware shifting or the metaverse environment creeping into your home's smart home, and then your smart home environment turning you into a next generation victim of ransomware.
Yeah, it seems like every new gizmo and gadget and exciting thing on the internet just brings a whole lot of new problems. I want to thank you guys for talking with me today. I have a million follow-ups for everything you've said, but we're running out of time. So I want to thank you again for doing this. This is a fantastic conversation. And I guess my last question, just to squeeze it in here, is what is the most exciting, hopeful thing on the horizon that any of you are excited about? I want to end on a positive note, because I feel like I'm scared now. So let's talk. What's something really, really exciting that's coming down the line?
The fact that law enforcement, international law enforcement communities are working on forfeiting the proceeds of cybercrime and using those funds to secure critical infrastructures. And that's a real shift that's occurring, where you're taking money out of that ecosystem and forcing the adversaries to have to defend themselves. I think that's a brilliant cultural shift.
That sounds pretty good. Yeah, that. Okay, great. That's a hopeful, optimistic end there. Well, thank you all very much, and thank you all for watching this. This is a great conversation. Thanks again.